Okay, guys, today we're going to look at finding our GCF. We are going to get into our factoring unit this week. So the first thing you need to be able to do is identify your greatest common factor. Okay, so you have done greatest common factor in middle school. You probably had an example of, like, let's say I wanted to find a GCF out of 6 and 9. What you would do then is list your factors of each number. So factor basically means just numbers that can divide into the given number evenly. Okay, so with 6, you know, you have 1 times 6, you have 3 times 2, and both of those will give me 6. So my factors of 6 will be 1, 2, 3, and 6. My factors of 9 will be 1, 3, and 9. So we see we have 1 and 3 in common for both of those numbers. However, when we say greatest common factor, we want it to be the highest one. So the answer for this one would be 3. Okay, so that's something you've done in middle school. Let's just do one more so I can make sure that you guys remember this. So let's say I asked you for 20 and 25. My factors of 20 will be 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. So all of those numbers can divide into 20 evenly. Okay, then for 25, I have 1, 5, and 25. Then I'm looking for my highest number. They have a 5 in common, so 5 would be our greatest common factor. So what you're going to see in the activity that we're doing is we have variables. Of course, this is algebra. You know, we're going to add letters in this at some point. So let's say I gave you x squared and I gave you x. When I'm thinking of my factors of x squared and x, I'm thinking, okay, what is this really made of? Meaning, if I have x squared, this is actually x times x. If I have just x, this is just x, or 1 times x. So when I'm thinking about my greatest common factor between my variables, I'm thinking, hey, I have 1x in common. So I can circle, or I can pull 1x from each of those terms. So my greatest common factor will be x for that one. So when we look at our examples, what you'll see is you'll have 2 terms. Or you could get more than 2 terms, but what you want to do first, because I like to break it down step by step. So we're going to look at our coefficients first, which is our number in front. Then after that, we can look at our variables to make it a little bit easier. So when I look at 3 and 9, my greatest common factor out of 9 and 3 are going to be 3, or is going to be 3. So if I was to actually list this out, just like we just did, my factors of 9 are 1, 3, and 9. And my factors of 3 are 1 and 3. As we see, that's in common, so that's how we got our 3. Now, same thing with the x's. We have x squared and we have x. Now, some of you may get it to the point where you don't need to really look at it separately, but some of you may need to break it down, and that's okay. So x squared would be x times x. And then x would just be x. I have 1x that I can pull from each of them. So that's going to be 3x as my answer. Okay. My next one here. Now keep in mind, I have a 1 in front of my x squared here. So when I'm thinking about my coefficients, I'm thinking of 1 and 5. And my greatest common factor out of 1 and 5 is going to be 1. Okay, then if I have x squared, that's again 2x's, so x times x. And then I have x there. I can pull 1x or circle 1x from each set of those. So that would just be x. 1x or just x. And that's your answer. All right. My next one here, we have 8x squared and 6x. So if I look at just 8 and 6, my GCF between those numbers would be 2. Okay, if I actually needed to draw that out, I will have 1. My factors of 6 will be 1, 2, 3, and 6. And my factors of 8 will be 1, 2, 4, and 8. So my highest number that they have in common is 2. So 2 will be my GCF. And again, for my x's, again, we have x times x, and we have x. So we have 1 x that they have in common. Okay, let me go back. Okay, we have 1 x that they have in common. So that's going to be 2x as my GCF. All right. So these next few are going to be practice. So I want you to go ahead and try those on your own. Press pause and then press play when you're ready to check your work. All right. So my next one here, practice problem number 1. I should have x as my GCF. I have a 1 here. So 1 and 10 is 1, and then you have 1x in common. So that's going to be 1x. My answer here is going to be 3x squared. So I'm looking at 15 and 12. That greatest common factor is 3 out of those. And then my x's, I have 2 x's here. So x times x. Then here I have x times x times x times x times x. So out of each of these, I can circle 2. And that's how I got my exponent of 2. Okay, when you're really looking at these, all you're doing is just taking the least, the exponent with the least, or the variable with the least exponent. Then my last one, that's going to be x. All right. So now, part 2. This is where we're kind of going to be working backwards, meaning we're still going to find our GCF as the first step. But then we're going to keep what's left over on the inside, okay? So think about it like this, okay? Usually you guys seen a problem where we might have had 2x times x plus 6. And I would usually do distributive property saying, okay, 2 times x, or 2x times x will give me 2x squared. 2x times 6 will give me 12x. So what I'm doing here is, I'm trying to work backwards. I'm going to go from here and I'm going to try to see how I got this first thing I started off with. So what's happening here? I'm going to find my GCF out of 2x and 10y, which my GCF will be 2. And then from there, I'm going to open up my parentheses. So first step, find your GCF. Then you're going to ask yourself, how do I get, or what can I multiply by 2 to get 2x? That's going to be x, because 2 times x is 2x. Then you're going to ask yourself, what can you do, or what can you multiply by 2 to get 10y? And that's going to be positive 5y. And that's my answer. Okay. Now your y for this one, really, you can just do distributive property. And if you do distributive property and you get back the same thing you started off with, then you are correct. As long as you have factored out the greatest common factor, not just the common factor. Okay. This next one, I have CD plus CG. So the letter they have in common is C. So C will be my greatest common factor. Then I have C times what will give me CD. That will be D. And then C times what will give me CG. That'll be positive G. And that's my answer. Okay. When you really think about it, what you're doing, whatever your greatest common factor is, you're really just dividing. So it may be kind of confusing to think that in your head. So you may want to write that you're dividing it. So that way I see, okay, C, D divided by C. My C's cancel out. I'm left with D. And my C's will cancel out here as well. So that's what I'm left with on the inside. All right. So my next one, I have 8a cubed minus 14a. So let's look at our greatest common factor. So our greatest common factor will be 2a. Okay, so again, you're looking at 8 and 14 first, and then you're looking at your A's. You have 3 A's here, and you have 1 A here. Okay, so they have 1 in common, so that's why that 1A was able to come on the outside. Then on the inside, I'm thinking about 2A times what will give me 8A cubed. That'll be 4A squared. Notice these are the 2 that I have left. So those 2 actually went right here. Don't forget I'm still adding my exponents. So if I have 3 in total, I have my 1 here and I have my 2. Okay. Then I'm going to think 2A times what will give me negative 14A. And that's going to be negative 7. All right. So go ahead and try these at the bottom. Pause the video and try to do those on your own and press play when you're ready. All right, let's look at it. So out of 6b to the 4th and 3b squared, my GCF is going to be 3b squared. Make sure you take the square. I had a lot of people today that was just writing 3b or just writing 3. What happens if you do that is you're not factoring out the greatest common factor, just a common factor. And that won't be simplified all the way. Okay, so you have to take out the greatest common factor. So I have 3b squared times what will give me 6b to the 4th. That's 2b to the 2nd power. And then 3b squared times what will give me negative 3b squared. It's going to be negative 1. And that's your answer. Okay, then my next part, I have my GCF is going to be 4. Okay, it's no D on this 4, so we cannot put a D as that greatest common factor. Okay, so 4 times what will give me 16D to the 3rd? That'll be 4D to the 3rd. 4 times what will give me negative 6D or negative 8D to the 6th? That'll be negative 2D to the 6th. And 4 times 1 will give us 4. And that's our answer.